Welcome to Popternative, where we dive into topical discussions from the worlds of pop culture, social media, and sports. Here is your host, Peter Remoliotis, aka PD Beats.
Hi, and welcome to the Popternative podcast here on Blab. I'm your host, as always, PD Beats. Peter Remoliotis on Twitter. I go as PD Beats. This is, of course, the podcast where we have digital dialogues from the worlds of social media, sports, and pop culture. Special week, we actually have 2 episodes of Popternative. This is part 1. Tomorrow we are back with part 2, but today we have 3 amazing guests that we are going to talk about social media in terms of college and university sports. So first we have managing editor of Yahoo Sports Canada, Steve McAllister. Steve, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Then we have a writer for Yahoo Sports and Buzz in the Net blog, Neate Sager. Nate, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. I really need to go to a tanning salon. Jeez.
And we have up-and-coming sports journalist and sports broadcaster, does law work, Carleton Ravens hockey. We have Carlos Verde. So, Carlos, thank you for joining us this evening.
Thanks for having me, Pete. Always a pleasure.
No problem. So I thought that very quickly, we start off Popternative. We kind of go around the table and people can kind of give their little bio about themselves, what's happening, in their lives, what our viewers, should know about them. So, Carlos, let's start with you. Just a brief little bio.
Yeah, not too much, honestly. I'm a second-year journalism student at Carleton University. I do pretty much everything for Carleton Ravens hockey. So, do narration of highlight packages, live play-by-play, all the writing that goes up on the site. In terms of journalism outside of sports comms, I also do a bit of writing soccer-wise mostly for a website called Last Word on Sports, just an online sports site. I've done a lot with the campus paper as well. Really just looking to get my feet wet in anything and everything. I have a bit of experience, entry-level experience in a lot of different areas. And I think I'm really excited to talk tonight with 2 guys that are obviously big in Canadian sports journalism, and Steve and Nate.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to have you, and I'm glad that we were able to make that connection on Popternative. That's what we love doing here. We love creating connections. Nate, we've had some good times at Memorial Cup and other events at World Juniors.
You're still bitter about the chips, aren't you?
Operation Chips was
You're
pretty...
still bitter about that.
It's pretty disappointing. We'll get into that in a second, but this is not the time to bring up Operation Chips. It's time for your bio.
Work for me.
So...
Anyway,
yeah. So
I don't know what I don't know what to say about myself in 25 words or less. I'll take the big in Canadian sports. Obviously, I've worked for Steve at Yahoo since the 2010 Olympics. Writing about anything and everything that's uniquely Canadian. Be it junior hockey, the CFL, university sports, the Olympics, and so on and so forth. And I do a few other things as well, some of which I'm proud of, and some less so.
Steve, floor is yours.
Sure. Well, like Carlos, I was a second-year journalism student, but unfortunately, that was way back in 1979. So that's a few years ago. But yeah, I've been fortunate to work in the sports communications industry for almost 35 years now, and really enjoyed the last 6 years at Yahoo, thanks to people like Nate and Andrew Buckholz, who does our 55-yard line blog. And it's just, I think it's a really fun time to be in the industry in terms of what we're doing and producing digital content. I know it's a tough go right now on the broadcast and print side, but there really is some cool stuff going on in the digital world.
Yeah, no, for sure. So basically what, I wanted to talk about on the show tonight with all 3 of you is, on Popternative, I don't know if you guys seen any past episodes, but we have had people that manage, the communications or social media for various universities in the U.S. So we've had, Cristiano from Georgia Tech Athletics. We just had Brian Wagner from University of Michigan. What we talk about is, their strategies, and NCAA sports it's a big deal. There are some, even more than this, but there's some games that, they're football games. Some of them, I think Michigan holds about 100,000 for games, and it's a big deal down there. The coverage, the press, and, this is college sports. Here in Canada, it's a little bit different. I think it's still growing. CIS sports is, obviously not as big of a deal as NCAA sports in the States. But I wanted to have this discussion with all three of you. Do you think that there's an effort being made in today's day and age, and using, platforms like social media to help it to maybe grow the CIS sport, especially nationally in our country, make people more aware of it? Steve, what do you think about that?
I think social media and blogs in particular. I mean, Nate, in a lot of respects, was a trailblazer with the university sports blog he did. Nate, a decade ago now, at least, if not longer.
Almost about 8-9 years, yeah.
I think the one thing social media and blogging is allowed to do is there's an opportunity for people like Nate to create content that can get out to an audience, and you don't have to worry if a newspaper doesn't want to publish your stuff, if a television station doesn't want to run your stuff. There's a place for people that run university sports to go to, and so I think there's been that opportunity through social media, and it gives the schools a chance as well. I'm sure, Carlos, you're seeing this at Carleton, where social media allows Carleton to get the word out about their teams and about their athletes.
Carlos, don't you also think that do you think that's a good thing? But do you also think that what Steve brought up about more people being able to to create their own blogs, there's more kind of competition as well?
I think when it comes to blogging, you're always going to have the issue of what kind of quality is it, because the best writers, the best podcasts, they're going to be picked up by professional outlets, right? So at the end of the day, especially when you get into the university level, a lot of, especially the student bloggers that you're getting, there might be some great content in terms of one-on-one interviews with coaches and players who make themselves very accessible in the CIS, but the quality might not be there. Now, when it comes to the overall CIS package, I think, guys, it's pretty fair to say that the CIS as a whole has regressed in the last decade. I mean, you're looking at a league that had a national TV deal, at least the OUA Conference did, 6, 7, 8 years ago, before my time, I'm happy to say. But it's a league that has a good product, and I think we see it when Sportsnet does show the UTEC Bowl, the Mitchell Bowl, the Vanier Cup in football. It's a decent product, and one done up and dressed up, properly. There's definitely value to be had there, even from just an advertising standpoint. I think it would be very feasible to cover the costs of a national TV deal based on advertising, even say with advertisers that are tailored to students in a lot of cases. I think that it's a market that has gone completely untapped, and a part of that has been a lack of effort on the part of the CIS and its member conferences in the last decade.
Nate, what do you think about that?
To what Carlos said, well, it's kind of a rock and a hard place deal. I mean, at one point, the people you're marketing to as students, most of them are cord nevers who probably don't have a cable connection. So why are you, if you're a national broadcaster, why are you going to put, games on TV if the people who would be in that market niche don't have cable, right? And then at the other end, there's probably a huge gap in people, let's say 25 to 49, who, came through university in that period when, it wasn't a big thing to go to games. And because what I always find, like, when I'm at, a university game, I kind of feel like I'm in Florida, right? Like, where anyone who isn't very young or very old doesn't fit in. So there's certainly issues with that. With respect to social media, I do see, like, conferences and schools making better use of it now. Like, you're starting to see, like, I saw, and Carlos, sorry to pump the competition, but I saw the U of Ottawa had this really nice sort of video feature about their women's basketball team, up, like, who these people are and what they do, and their world just isn't defined by shooting layups and defensive drills. So we're starting to see things like that. You see, like, the OUA puts out a plays of the week. This week on Yahoo, we had a post, I think, that went pretty viral about this crazy last second shot in a basketball game in Kelowna. And that was all, like, the CIS pushing that out there, where that didn't happen 2-3 years ago. It probably should have been, but at least it's happening now, right?
Is there, and this goes for the whole panel, and Steve, you could start with this. From what you've seen, do you think that there is because, NCAA, these big games, these big bowls, it's a big deal. It's huge. There's so many people. There's a lot of management. Like I said, it's run like a pro sports event, right? There's a lot of work that goes into it. Is there a fear for that with Canada who don't want to maybe compete with that, or believe that, there's not as many resources available to kind of, create and pump out these big events or, big leagues? I just see CIS, falling a little bit flat compared to NCAA, and there are some fantastic athletes that Carlos and I talk about a lot in Canada and Ottawa specifically.
Yeah, to quote Bill Shakespeare, there's a rub, Pete. I think that you have, I would go a step further than what Carlos said. I think the university sports product in this country is terrific. I think there's a lot of great stories that aren't getting told. There's a lot of great programs. Nate and I often talk about the 2 basketball programs in Ottawa. I refereed in the OHA back in the 80s, and I always told people that university hockey was the best hockey we were working in the province. The problem is you don't have the same culture for university sports in this country that you have in the U.S., where you have alumni willing to write checks for hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars, and you look at the television rights and what television networks are paying for rights in the U.S. So it really is apples and oranges, and that's why I'm pretty hopeful and optimistic right now, and I'm very big on Canadian university sports. I think Graham Brown's going to have an opportunity here, and I think you're going to see Graham Brown come in and move the needle a little bit, because I think for the first time the CIS finally they have to run this thing as a business if they're going to get any traction at all.
Carlos, what do you think about this concept of
CIS? Just to piggyback off the point, I think the CIS is definitely at a point where it's at a sort of a pendulum point right now. It could go one way or the other. It could continue on that trajectory downwards that it has been on the last 5, 6, 7 years since it lost the TV deal with the Score, or it could turn things around. And I'm hopeful and optimistic that that'll happen. But then at the same time, I think back to CIS Hockey Nationals last year in Halifax, great venue at the Metro Center, and the teams were playing in front of 6,500, 7,000 empty seats. And you're talking about guys, UNB, Alberta, Guelph, UQTR, top 4 teams at this tournament. And these are teams that are loaded with major junior players. I'm not talking about 4 or 5 questionable borderline Q guys or O guys. We're talking about teams that are top to bottom filled, in the case of Alberta, with point per game WHL players. Like the CIS for me, and it goes beyond hockey. It goes into basketball. It goes into soccer. It's a much better product than people, and it starts with people my age on campus. It's a much better product than people give it credit for. This preseason, even for hockey, our men's hockey team at Carleton played the Binghamton Senators. Realistically, it was more like the Evansville Icemen. It was kind of a 50-50 preseason split between the AHL team and the ECHL team.
It was mostly ECHL, though. If you look at the roster that played, almost all those guys are there.
It's about 10-10 now, I'd say. Zay, Lapine, a bunch of guys stayed up. But at the end of the day, in the lead up to this game, the student body was chirping Carleton on its own Facebook page, going, oh, you guys are going to get skated off the rink, blah, blah, blah. What happened? Carleton's systems came through, and everyone went, oh, wow, we didn't know that every single one of our players played in the OHL. We ended up beating Binghamton, Reed Evansville, 1-0. And I think that took so many people by surprise, just because nobody expects CIS anything to be comparable to pro anything. And I think players like the Scrub brothers in basketball going over to Greece and Germany and Netherlands to play basketball. You look at guys from Carleton, guys from Alberta. I mean, even Joel Ward is an example with the Washington Capitals. Not sure if he's still there, but he played at UPEI. The CIS has so much potential, and it is still a developmental league in certain sports that gives players the opportunity to go forward. People just don't know about it.
And Nate, we're like, in terms of, talking about, development, like I've spoken to, Marty Johnson, the coach of the Carleton Ravens, and Richard Bew, the video coach. And, this concept of, like Carlos mentioned, you hit it right on the point, Carlos. They play, they go to school, they get a degree, they get that piece of paper, they're playing hockey, the door is not closed, a professional contract can come right afterwards, they can go play in Europe, they can go play in the American Hockey League, like what it is. Do you think it's overlooked in terms of something, as a development, of their careers? Because maybe some people are going to be like, oh no, I didn't make it past major, junior. I'm going to just go to school now and play hockey. It's kind of over. But you could see that they're continuing their careers, and they maybe go to Europe afterwards or something, right, Nate?
Yeah, there is the odd guy. There is the occasional guy who's going to make the NHL and of university hockey, and there's lots of players who are going to go on to make some money in the game for a few years afterward. Like it really does seem mysterious why it's been a tough sell in so many places. I think a lot of it is just people don't know. Carlos hit the nail on the head. Like people said, thinking Carleton wouldn't be able to put up a fight against I guess what was a sort of a NAHL team. But I mean, I've seen that too at World Junior time. People get surprised when a team of university guys beats the Canadian national junior semi-split squad or whatever.
Yeah,
and it's just like, no, you shouldn't be shocked at all. These are guys who played at that level. But it's tough because I mean, junior hockey has got so much marketing behind it, and it's advertising that it's got the Connor McDavid or whoever playing in it, and it's got that appeal. It's playing in big rinks. It's on national TV, and university hockey doesn't have those things. It's kind of underground in that regard.
I think that's one of the things. That's one of the. I was just going to add, Pete, I think that's one of the issues, too, with what we've seen happen in mainstream media. You look at a market like Ottawa where, as Nate will know, the Ottawa Sun and the Ottawa Citizen sports departments have just been shredded. And so to get someone out to cover a Carleton or Ottawa U basketball game during the week, like this week's a great example. You've got the Senators on the road right now, the Red Blacks from the Grey Cup. How many people are left at the Citizen and Sun to go out and cover an Ottawa U or Carleton sporting event? And so I think to a large extent, it's been a bit of a catch-22 where newspapers and televisions don't promote the university sports. The universities certainly haven't helped themselves because they haven't done a good job from a sports information standpoint. And so if people aren't aware that they have this great product, they're not going to go out and watch it.
Yeah, and just to tack on to that, it was like I remember telling them, like, do what NHL and NBA or MLB or NFL teams do, where you basically have your own reporter. Like, don't be putting out press releases. Actually, just write the feature stories yourself and see where that goes.
They were doing that in the QMJHL as well, though. I mean, I think
the junior leagues have started doing that very well.
I think Nate, Vincent Tremblay, he did that for the Gatineau Olympic a couple of years ago. He was like the writer, and that is something that I think is important. Carlos, how does it work at Carleton? Is it basically, I know it's you, mostly running the show for Carleton University men's hockey, but in terms of, coverage and media, what you're writing, is that going, like to the Charlotte? Is that going on Carleton Ravens Athletics website? Like what's the process there?
Yeah, so basically I do everything for men's and women's hockey, try and put out one feature, one preview, and a game recap every week. I mean, I'm still a full-time student, right? So I do what I can in addition to doing the broadcast and traveling on road trips. So it's busy, but the only mainstream, well, not mainstream, but the only regular coverage that we have is the campus paper. They do as good a job as they can. They send out one rookie photographer, one 17-year-old reporter, and, that's it. I try and feed them stories. I try and tell them, on this year's team, Brett Gustafson, former Ottawa 67, first year with our team, he was in Goon 2 this summer. He was part of the filming in Scarborough. Yeah. We've got Derek Froats, who's battled through 6-7 different injuries to play CIS hockey after a really, injury-riddled major junior career. You try and feed these stories out, but the fact is, outside of the Binghamton game, no, not even semi-mainstream outlets in Ottawa have even come forward. And even with the basketball team, it's a top-ranked basketball team, but it's pretty rare outside of the Capital Hoops games between us and Ottawa U that they actually get coverage. So, it's a very campus-centric feel, despite it being one of the biggest universities and becoming one of the biggest varsity schools as well in Canada.
But Nate, doesn't CIS sports need guys like Carlos? I know Carlos. I'm really familiar with Carlos. I'm a big fan of him. I think he's an upcoming, amazing, journalism in a couple of years. He is very aggressive. And I'm not saying, that in a bad way. He's very, persistent with getting content out and doing a really good job. Don't you think like for example, guys like myself and Carlos, we, network and we email people and we're pushing, Carlos, you could agree with me right now. There should be efforts from people, even if it's a volunteer, for the university to, message and be like, hey, Guelph Storm, you know what I mean? We have a player on the Carleton Ravens, playing a game, one of your alumni, check it out. You just tweet at them, and then maybe you'll get a favor or a retweet or a feature from the Guelph Storm. We do that all the time in the QMJHL. We kind of, whether they're playing in the NHL or AHL or, CIS, we had a bunch of players that now play for the Varsity Reds in the UNB, Randy Gazzola, Alex Dubois. We're always keeping up with our alumni, and that's some coverage. That's coverage. You need that person to push that to happen, don't you?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, you definitely, connections are everywhere. I mean, it's just always amazing, and I haven't been covering sports that long, relatively speaking, but it's just, and I start to think of how many people I've come across and, the various, nooks and crannies and corners of the country that they're scattered to. And it's all the, the thread is, developmental level sports, whether it's university or the CHL. So yeah, you definitely have to be on that. I mean, I certainly, when I was younger and had more energy, I did a lot of that.
Yeah. I'm speaking more for, the up and coming, like the people who, want, like Carlos, who want to do this for a living. And I think that, Carlos is a great example.
Never be afraid to market yourself.
No, Carlos is a great example of initiating digital dialogues, conversations. You know what I mean? Carlos reached out to me on Twitter a couple of years ago, right, Carlos? We had a mutual friend at Adam D'Agostini, and who played for Carleton Ravens lacrosse team, and we were working at the World Juniors, and Carlos, wrote to me and wanted to connect over coffee and Carleton Ravens hockey, and we were able to create that connection. I do it all the time. It's basically how, Steve, I did that with you. I connected with you on Twitter. It's something that I think is very important, that I'm an advocate for. People are afraid to initiate dialogues and conversations and to be aggressive in terms of marketing and promoting, whether it's sports, whether it's their blog, whether it's anything they're doing. Steve, like, do you see what I'm saying? Does it make sense what I'm saying a little bit, Steve?
I think to some point, Pete, you're right. I think I also believe, though, the one issue is that there really hasn't been a feeder system or a training ground for sports information directors going through the system, or you have high turnover, and we've seen that with national sport federations in Canada, where someone will get a job at Athletics Canada and they'll be there for 9 months, and then they move on to Bowling Canada, and there was a time 20 years ago where, and Nate, you'll know this, I mean, PR people in that national sports governing body system, they would work for a dozen different sports governing bodies over a 12 to 15 year period. And I think we've seen something at universities where it seems to me only in the last decade where we're seeing more and more schools now with full-time sports information directors, but even those people are strapped. I have a daughter who just graduated from Western and played 4 years of university lacrosse, and I talked to the sports information guy there, and that guy's trying to handle 20, 24, 28 different sports teams, and it's impossible. And Carlos, you know what I'm talking about. You're trying to update a website, look after the coaches. If you got a game on television, you got to help the network with lineups and that kind of stuff, and it's just way too much for one person. And God love Michelle Belanger at the CIS. I don't know how Michelle does it, running a national sports body as a one-man operation. And that's why I'm bullish on Graham Brown. I think Graham's going to come in, and I think you're going to see a lot more infrastructure put in place at the CIS, and that's how the needle's going to get moved across the country. Yeah,
further to that, there's still a lot of schools where, like, the sports information officer is still has to be like an event manager, like the person who's turning the lights on and off. Rob Pettipies, a friend of mine who we used to do CIS blog together. Now he's works for the Toronto Maple Leafs and does super secret things. I remember him joking one time when we were leaving the gym after the CIS Final 8, and they're tearing down the basketball for hockey, and Michelle's just sitting there, they've torn the whole thing down except for the table Michelle's working at. We're like, Michelle could still be there, but for all we know, This was like 2 days later. But yeah, so we definitely need more staff. Like, I don't know if a lot of people realize that at NCAA Division I school, you have a sports information director, but there are like some who just look after certain sports, right? Like he or she doesn't have to look after 20 sports. They have one for football, then they have a few who break down, into different areas.
Well,
So,
just
depending on the teams.
Continue.
Sorry, this August, Murray State, Valparaiso, and I think it was Baylor came up to Carleton for the Can-Am Shootout basketball tournament. And, I'm sitting there with our main sports information director, Taylor Pritchard, just got hired in the summer. Really great guy, working hard. And we're there trying to run the whole thing as two guys. And Murray State, this is a small school from a mid-major conference in Murray, Kentucky, right? I think they play in the Ohio Valley Conference, if I'm not mistaken. And they show up.
Jones's alma mater.
They've got, I think they've got 4 guys just working video. They've got their sports information director because basketball is the big sport. So he traveled with them to Canada. He's got 3 graduate assistants with him in sports information. And what it comes down to, and these guys all have the perfectly pressed shirts, khakis, school outfit khakis, everything. What it comes down to is money, right? It's a different culture in the United States, right? You're talking about a system where you go to a school, doesn't matter what industry you're in, you're expected to contribute back whatever you have as an alumnus, right? And in the CIS, there just doesn't exist that same sort of pride. You don't meet someone on the street and they go, did you go to St. FX or did you go to Dow? Or did you go to Western Queens is a little bit different, but it's still nowhere near the same level as, say, like, South Carolina. I remember driving through South Carolina and you pulled over on the side of the road and the guy's only going to help you if you're a Clemson fan or if you're a South Carolina fan, right? It's a much different academic and then, athletic academic culture down there.
Oh, well, it was funny because last week we had Brian Wagner, creative and digital lead for University of Michigan, and then we had Courtney Schilling, who does social media for the Cleveland Cavaliers, and she was joking around. She's like, I can't believe, I'm on the camera with a Wolverine. I'm an Ohio State fan all my life. So she was kind of like joking around, hesitating that she didn't want to like talk that much to Brian. But
I think you didn't get her for this week. Oh boy.
Yeah. but it's Nate. We will get to Operation Chip soon. Don't worry about that because I have to tell Steve and Carlos about what a schemer you really are at these hockey events, stealing all the chips from all the journalists. But yeah, no, very, very quickly to get back on point. Brian Wagner is creative lead of University of Michigan. He's basically, Steve, like the information officer. Like he's doing a lot more than that, but he's overseeing, the strategies and all that. But he has a team of social media coordinators, PR people. He's basically he's acting almost like an information officer, like you said, right? He's making sure everything gets out, everything pumps out, and he does all the creative stuff. So I think Carlos, you had a good point about money, but there's got to be some measures taken in terms of whether it's financial or whether it's the way it's structured to maybe get CIS sports to another level in terms of popularity, in my opinion. Carlos.
Well, all I can say to that is that ArcelorMittal, I don't even know if I'm saying that right, but we have a mining and steel company sponsoring our biggest interscholastic championships, right? Just look at the companies that are sponsoring the NCAA Frozen Four, March Madness, and then you realize we've got, a second tier mining and steel company on the face of all the CIS events. And I'm not saying that to belittle the CIS. I'm just saying, like, comparatively speaking, you're talking about two things that are operating on completely different planes, right? Yeah. Is there untapped potential for the CIS, both, as an on-field or on-ice product and as an off-ice brand? Yes. Is that going to be achieved to the extent you're talking about? I don't think so, just because it's a very different culture here. It's already a very saturated sports market, in my opinion. You think just about the NHL alone, what that takes up in terms of sports fans as spending dollars in Canada and attention. I think that especially in the cases of the big sports, CIS football, CIS hockey, and CIS basketball, the market's too saturated in Canada for real noticeable growth right now.
Yeah, I noticed tonight, like the Raptors are on TSN 4, and this is a home game against LeBron James in Cleveland, and it's on TSN 4 because of hockey commitments, and I think Sportsnet's running 3 different hockey games. So yeah, hockey just kind of sucks the life out of everything.
Mm-hmm. Steve, yeah.
Yeah, I'd add Pete too. I just think that this thing has to really be driven by the universities and the CIS themselves. Like they have to put the infrastructure in place. They have to go out and get, to Carlos' point, go out and get the top tier sponsors. They've got to come up and create a product and promote a product that will bring fans out.
Mm-hmm.
But you have tug of wars within schools themselves where I met with someone from one of the Toronto universities yesterday for a coffee, and they're telling me, they're worried about a new president coming in, and all of a sudden athletics takes a backseat to research dollars. Or he came from a background where the school president only cared about research dollars, and athletics didn't have a place on the priority list whatsoever. So if you have the schools themselves playing these kinds of games, how are you ever going to get all the universities on the same page to really promote athletics as on a unified front?
I think everyone brings up really good points. I think, Carlos, you kind of wrapped it up a little bit to where, yeah, there is potential for CIS, to grow. But, if we're like Steve said, we're comparing apples and oranges a little bit. They're already at a huge level where they're getting so many people at their games, and digital and social media is full force in college sports down there. It's insane. We had Justin Karp, who does, the Pac-12 conference and the Pac-12 networks. Like what he has to manage just with the television network and, making sure that all the teams at some point kind of, get exposure because he's dealing with a whole conference. It's a whole different level down there that I don't necessarily, because like I said, Carlos, it's great hockey, CIS hockey, like you said. You said before we went on air, you can plug it in right now. You think, for how much you pay, it's amazing hockey, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't think that there's any better bang for a buck. This in itself, the Ottawa market is way oversaturated when it comes to sports, especially this time of the year. I mean, just look at Ottawa 67's attendance, right? It's been absolutely decimated. You're talking about a team. I mean, yes, there are intangibles like giveaway tickets and parking at the facility and stuff. But at the end of the day, this is a team that was drawing upwards of 7,000 fans 5 years ago when they were at the exact same location. Now they're struggling to draw 2,500 in a city of 1 million plus. You can point to any number of factors in that, but I think it's really just indicative of how the Ottawa sports market has grown, and I think has maybe grown too quickly. And I'm going to cite the Red Blacks here. I know they're in the Grey Cup, and I know we got 24,000 for the Eastern Final against Hamilton, I guess it was last weekend. But if this team had gone 2-16 again or 3-15, I'm quite sure that attendance would have dipped below 20,000 already this year, just because there's other places to put your money. The Sens are overachieving to start the year, in my opinion. 67s are another option. The Fury soccer team went on a good run as well. There's so much going on in a city that really are conservative spenders to begin with. And then if you want to slide CIS in there at Ottawa, with Ottawa and Carleton, you even have choice between your CIS spending dollars. It's just, there's too much going on in this market right now. And I think you're going to see some teams pushed out.
Yeah. Well,
that's why I think you really have to get the student body engaged, and it has to start there. And at a school like Carleton, like why can't you get 2,000 people out to watch a basketball game for the student body? And if you're expecting, Carlos, you're absolutely right. If you're expecting 2,000 people to come from the city of Ottawa, that's highly unlikely given everything that's going on in your city. And we see it here in Toronto. If you want to go watch a Ryerson U of T or York hockey game, you're competing with the Toronto Maple Leafs, you're competing with the Toronto Marlies, you're competing with the Brampton Beast, you're competing with, I think there's Neate 22 OJHL teams in the greater Toronto area. And that's not counting the restaurants. Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of competition out there.
And one thing that I think really has to be noticed too, or mentioned, is that it varies so much. So many schools treat their student bodies differently when it comes to marketing their athletics teams, right? Your varsity teams. I mean, I look at Western, Queens. I know that our hockey team was at U of T this past weekend or 2 weeks ago, and students are free. It's $5 for the public or free here. And then you've got other schools like UNB charging 12, 14, 16 bucks out in Fredericton. I think that, and it goes back to the management and growth of the CIS as a whole. And you spoke about it, Steve, when it comes to the athletic departments dealing with the board of governors at their school. There has to be some kind of base investment or base ticket price across the board in the CIS, because right now there's such a wide array of approaches, both from a front office standpoint and a marketing to student standpoint, that it's impossible to grow the brand as a whole right now because each situation is so different.
Nate, do you want to add anything to that as well?
Yeah, I know that's the one problem I think across university sports is there's that old saying, the world's goods are never equally divided. And you look at like UNB, where they've got 2 full-time hockey coaches, and you look at the men's basketball programs such as Carleton and UBC that have a full-time assistant, whereas at other schools the head coach is barely full-time. I mean, that's not really a way to grow a sport when the things are so when one's. I mean, you look at Carleton. I mean, their men's basketball team probably has a bigger coaching staff than some football teams. I mean, how are you really ever going to be taken seriously and credibly if it's the same teams winning year after year because some have so much more in resources than the others?
Yeah, and so I think.
And the funny part about that is when someone actually tries to bring things in line, like my friend Brian Crawford did at the OUA, everyone jumps all over him and starts going all tabloidy about the fact he decides football teams can only have 2 helmets because why do you need 3 helmets for an 8-game season? And it gets it gets pounced on for it. And of course, Stu Lang goes up ahead and breaks that rule anyway because he's Stu Lang and no one's going to tell him what to do anyway. And if people don't know that story, I'm sure they can Google it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's something I wanted to talk about given the panel that we had, having Steve on, having Carlos and Nate. I think it would have been really cool just to discuss.
Oh, for sure.
Moving on more now, before getting into, soccer and brand crisis, very quickly, we had a really long game in the Memorial Cup a couple years ago, and went
the triple overtime,
and I was really hungry, and a lot of things were closed, and I go to the chips, and there are no chips, and then I find out that a couple of journalists. I don't even think it was just you, Nate. I think they were all gone. That was the story, Carlos. Long story short, they were all gone, and then Nate was kind of taking credit for it. He was just like, Operation Chips is a success. And then there was part 2 of Operation Chips was with water, I believe, too, right, Nate?
No, not the water. There was no water involved.
Are you sure?
The real story is someone's wife was pregnant and had a huge craving for Old Dutch chips, and there were about 9 jumbo family-sized bags left in the media room that somehow, I don't know how they must have grown legs, made it from the media room to the trunk of that journalist's car. And I'm not married, so it wasn't my wife, but I might have had something to do with getting them out there.
Good guy, Nate Sager. Good guy.
And then we took another 14 bags out after the final 4, so 23 bags.
So, ladies and gentlemen, that is Operation.
Penny Boffins died to bring you this information.
That is Operation Chips in a nutshell. But Carlos, talking about you're a big soccer guy, you're a big footy guy. You talk about soccer a lot. On your show 2-Man Advantage with Michael Nellis. Talk to me a little bit about where you talk about a brand crisis when it comes to North American teams and North American sports.
Well, it's a complex issue with a lot of different elements going into it, obviously, Pete. But the base is that, you get North American fans here. They see the English Premier League, the German Bundesliga on TV, and they go, oh, man, I really want something like that with my local club. They see the flags, the chanting, the canisters of tear gas, all that. It's all part of the experience, right? So they go, and they're coming to these expansion teams, whether it's in Major League Soccer or one of the lower leagues, North American League, United League. And they're going and they're saying to their clubs, we want this sense of club identity. But especially in the MLS, these clubs are focused on building their brand. It's not about the supporter culture. It's not, and the clearest example of that is New York City FC, which is basically an entity of Yankee Sports and Entertainment. They're playing at a Yankee stadium. There's no designs for a soccer-specific stadium for the team in the next couple of years. And, supporters are going and saying, well, we want to grow this soccer culture. But at the end of the day, it's all about pushing, the New York Yankee brand or their English affiliate Manchester City brand. So it's kind of this contentious issue, and it gets really nasty in the lower leagues as well, where you get this management that's trying to run the team like a minor league hockey team or a minor league baseball team.
Yeah.
Right, anything like that. And these supporters are going, well, we want to have that sense of club identity, but it's really difficult to attain that here in North America just because soccer hasn't been around in a professional sense for very long. You look at the most successful teams in Major League Soccer, Portland Timbers, Seattle Sounders, Vancouver Whitecaps, teams out west that have had serious soccer teams since the 70s, whether it was the old NASL, whether it was the A-League, things like that. At the end of the day, it's really tough to strike that good balance with an expansion team, I think in any minor league sport, between that supporter culture and just trying to build the brand up at all. And so that's kind of the strife for minor league soccer, especially right now in North America.
But and Nate and Steve, you can kind of chime in with this because it's directed to not only Carlos but to you guys too. Don't you think it's kind of what you brought up in the beginning? We were talking about Ottawa and hockey, Nate, where there's like hockey kind of takes over because it's very popular here. Like you said, like the Red Bulls in New York, there's like the New York Yankees. There's a lot of stuff going on. If you look at in the MLS, the Seattle Sounders, their games are I've watched some of their games. It's nuts. It's crazy. It's pretty crazy. Like I'm not into MLS as much as you are, Carlos. So
they have like 35,000 season ticket holders.
Yeah, they had a lot of people.
They average 45.
But there's not as much in Seattle as compared to. I mean, I
would disagree with that though. There's the Seahawks and the T-Birds. The T-Birds, you can't forget, are one of the best drawing teams in the WHL. Yes. Like I think the Seattle example, it also functions so well there, the Sounders, because it's kind of an alternative city up in the Northwest, so they embrace soccer in a way that Middle America or Southern America is not going to. Plus, you've got way more spending money because of high tech out there, right? So you've got way more discretionary income than, say, again, Middle America or even Canada for that matter. So the Seattle example works, but at the same time, there's still quite a bit going on in that market, and that's not why I think the Sounders have done so well.
What about Vancouver Whitecaps? That's a similar thing too. There is a lot. Like you look at the Canadian teams that broke up, Steve, in the MLS. They all seem to be doing very well. I couldn't get tickets to a Toronto FC game when I was in Toronto last year. Like it was impossible.
I was going to mention, Pete. Maple Leaf Sports Entertainment is everybody's favorite whipping boy up here in Toronto. But I will say, I think what MLSE and more specifically Paul Byrne did when Toronto FC came into Toronto was he went out and spoke to the supporters and asked the supporters on what they wanted. And they built a stadium that was soccer specific at that time, and they were able to basically sell the sizzle there for quite a long time and get 20,000 people. The team was horrible and didn't make the playoffs. And they did get to a point the last 2 or 3 years where you started to see empty seats because I think Carlos, the team's has gone through 9 managers since their inception, didn't make the playoffs, lost some good players. But I think as a business and as a brand, MLSE has been pretty successful with Toronto FC.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to talk about that, just TFC, the fact that they had 65 or 70% capacity attendance after 7 or 8 seasons of losing before Jovinko came this year, that's testament to MLSE that they were able to build that brand while maintaining that supporter culture over the course of 7 or 8 losing seasons, and even more than that in terms of coaches.
And in terms of that, I guess I don't think they're necessarily things that have to be in tension with each other, the brand versus the supporter culture. I mean, the Ottawa Fury FC here, our team in the NASL, or as I call it, the nasal. Come on, guys, that was funny.
You got to chuckle.
Yeah.
I saw this review.
Humor from a guy who's not dad material.
I just grabbed my Just getting my handkerchief
Yeah,
in it, Nate.
but they're a good example of, they had that slogan, cheer locally, follow globally, something to that effect. And, I went and got in the supporters section for the playoff game against Minnesota United, and it was just like a small scale, version of what you'd get at a match in Europe with, people chanting and singing things that were a little bit off color, like, singing when the Minnesota players were loosening up just in case they had to go to the game. They start chanting, "You'll always be a sub, you'll always be a sub," and they've got all the different chants to support the Fury. And it felt like something. And people are waving flags. There was that guy in the Frosty costume. I don't know if you saw him, but he took one of those plastic lawn Frosties and wore it over his torso and face, and it was just spraying bubbles for just one of those whimsical things you could only get away with doing at a soccer match. And I was just kind of like, why can't every sport be like this? And I'm coming at this from the perspective of being, I guess, a soccer illiterate, didn't play the game, don't follow it, but do appreciate it. And it was just, so that, to me, that's the model. You just have to let these things, develop organically and see where it goes. You can't just, and put in North America, there are a lot of sports organizations that are used to doing everything top down, and fans just are expected to go along with it, whereas when it should really be filtering up, I always love the story in the Premier League. Aston Villa wears claret and blue as their colors. Well, how did they get those? Because those were the colors of the tiles in the pub where the team was organized. Things like that you can't, things that you couldn't make up or hash out in a marketing meeting or the lifeblood of soccer.
You can't.
Little Easter eggs there, right?
For sure, yeah.
Well, and it ties back to the whole idea of, you can't just create that supporter culture anywhere out of scratch, right? I mean, you look at the Ottawa Senators, the first 8-10 years of their existence, again, before my time, but when the Habs came to town or the Leafs came to town, it was like a Leafs or Habs home game. And we've seen over the last 6, 7, 8 years, it's still somewhat to that effect, but less so as a new generation of Sens fans filters in. And I think the same thing's going to happen with soccer now with these really successful MLS franchises in places like Seattle. Even Kansas City has done really well. You're going to have these kids that are growing up with MLS soccer, with Sporting Kansas City soccer. And I think that's only good for the sport, and that's going to really help create, like you said, Nate, that kind of Aston Villa experience where the club grows with its supporters.
And the thing is, for fans, your age, you've grown up playing FIFA. The world is getting smaller all the time. When I was a teenager back in the 90s, it was really hard to find any information about soccer. You got the, Soccer Saturday with Graham Leggett when they played the condensed games on TSN on Saturday morning. So, but now it's like you can watch any game, almost any big game every weekend. Anyway, sorry to interject.
Yeah, no, it's a great point, Nate. I've got a 19-year-old son who grew up getting dressed for hockey games on Saturday morning, watching Premiership games on TSN or Sportsnet. So he knew guys playing for Manchester United just as well as he knew the guys playing on the Leafs and Senators. So you're right, it's a different culture. Listen, we saw the same thing here with Blue Jay crowds this summer, where when I covered the team in '92 and '93 for those World Series runs, it was basically a lot of those people in the 50,000 crowds that were just there to say they were at the baseball game when they went to work the next day. Those crowds this summer, they were young people having fun. It was fun being at a baseball game, and I think the players fed off some of that energy. Just a completely different dynamic than there was for those 2 World Series championship seasons.
Carlos, do you also think, though, that maybe, MLS, and like I said, I wouldn't say illiterate. I do, used to play soccer, played FIFA all the time. I'm obviously just not as knowledgeable as you are. So I apologize if this question kind of seems offside or off base. But do you think maybe there's a fear that, what's happening in Europe, Barclays Premier League and all that, can not be touched by, MLS or North America, that it's kind of, a thing down there, a formula they have, that it's their thing, it's their culture. So North America doesn't even want to experiment around that formula because it's, Europe versus North America.
Well, I think it's a really interesting question, Pete, and you're totally on side with the question because
Good, because I wasn't
Pay
sure. Like I was thinking.
for it. They're bringing over all of these, Twilight Zone career kind of players. You look at Didier Drogba. Sebastian
Yeah.
Jovinko with TFC is actually an outlier, being 27, 28 in the prime of his career, coming over, dominating. He's probably going to head back to Europe because he had such a great year, but that's beside the point. I think MLS is going about things and running their league in a way that is still pretty different than Europe. There's no promotion relegation system. You pay the $80 million, $85 million franchise fee, and that's it. You're in the league. You're not going to get relegated to some minor league. There's a playoff system which is in place, which doesn't take place in any top flight league in Europe whatsoever. The only promotion playoff the only playoff I can think of is when, the bottom two teams play the top two teams from the lower league. But MLS has playoffs, it has rivalry week, it has a salary cap, it has revenue sharing. There's so many different things in MLS compared to the EPL that I don't even think on a projection basis, I don't even think they're aiming to achieve the heights or the format even of European pro leagues. I think it's a very unique brand, and it's kind of neat because you have soccer, which is such a global game, being put into a North American context with American marketing in terms of rivalries, and we're going to hype up these players like a Clint Dempsey from the U.S. national team and this and that and playoff weekend. So it's really interesting because it's an approach to soccer with a very North Americanized mindset. And so I don't even think they're trying to emulate the English league or the French league or the German league. I think they've taken what they can out of those leagues and they're giving it an American twist. And I think it's really worked. The league has grown incredibly. I mean, it's doubled in teams in the last decade alone. I really think the sky's the limit for MLS right now.
Steve, what do you think in terms of Carlos's points?
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more, Carlos. I think what you're going to see, it's really going to take off the next 20, 25 years when you see more Canadian and more American players coming through the system who are superstars in the league. And so having a Clint Dempsey and a Landon Donovan, a Tim Howard, they're going to be tens of, or not hundreds of those types of players around the league. And that's how you're going to sell it. You're not going to sell the league having guys come over from the Bundesliga or Serie A or the Premiership when they're 35, 36 years old. It's going to be that wave of good young North American players that I think are going to carry the league over the next quarter century.
Nate, do you agree with the panel overall about that perspective?
Yeah, it's a lot. It's pretty analogous to when the NHL probably started adding more American franchises.
Yeah.
At the time, the talent, well, the American hockey talent wasn't there, but now it is. I mean, right now, even if you filter down to the OHL, some of the most successful teams right now are the ones that have the most American kids. But yeah, you certainly have to adapt the sport to the North American market. It's kind of funny. I was talking to someone, I think, after the Fury semifinal game against Minnesota United, and someone said something such as, well, soccer doesn't have playoffs. I'm like, well, we have to have it in North America. I don't want to have to learn how to spell aggregate. But so I mean, yeah, they've certainly got to tailor to that, like a single elimination playoffs, an actual championship game, and not, if we tie on the road, we clinch. If we win by 2 goals, we have, we clinch the league pennant or whatever. I mean, so yeah, that's where MLS has said we kind of got to forge our own path here, and gradually over time, they've sort of taken on some of the trappings of European soccer because people have, they've got more familiar with it. They know that it's not a team, it's a club, and you've got names like Sporting Kansas City. I certainly remember when MLS started and they had teams called the Wiz and the Mutiny and things, and just gimmicky, East Coast Hockey League type things like that.
I was just about to say Swamp Rat. That's it.
Yeah, there's stuff out of various airsats, low level pro leagues. It's grown, and it's only going to continue growing. And obviously, they've been smart to avoid what was the fatal thing for the original North American Soccer League, which was getting into this arms race, signing up anyone the average North American sports fan might have heard of, like the old New York Cosmos when they had Pelé and Franz Beckenbauer and all those other guys.
Yeah, Canal, yeah, you're right. Bang on, Nate.
Yeah. Well, I think it's time to wrap up this episode of Popternative. Very quickly, we'll just go around. First of all, I just want to thank all three of you for joining me on this podcast this evening. Like I understand, you're all very busy. Carlos with school, and Steve, it goes without saying, with Yahoo and everything. And Nate, you're doing a lot and writing a lot and contributing a lot. So thank you guys so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us.
On
My
this.
pleasure, Pete.
No problem.
Yep, enjoyed the discussion, guys.
I enjoyed it too. So closing remarks from all of you, and maybe give me one Twitter account. It could be a personal account, or it could be a sports brand that you think is worth following for our viewers. Something that has good tweets or good informing or anything. So Nate, we'll start with you. One that comes to mind.
Well,
I have a feeling. I have three in mind that you might say, and I want to see. Other than your own, yeah. Yours is Nate Sager.
My own, okay.
Everyone's gonna follow you.
Yeah, you just blocked me probably, right?
No.
Well, I'll definitely throw in a plug for I think people who are interested in hockey scouting and whatnot should definitely follow Scott Wheeler, who's a Carleton student who does a lot of hockey writing, pension plan puppets. I think he's at Scott C. Wheeler.
He goes to Carleton?
Yeah, he's a fourth-year guy.
I believe he does, yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, he's one of those fourth-year guys, so you can't even talk to him. He has to talk to you first.
He walked past me in the hall. I turned the other way.
Yeah, no eye contact.
None.
Carlos, what about you? Any accounts?
Give Brian Floyd a follow. He's the managing editor at SB Nation. I'm a college football guy. Love NCAA football, but even outside of college football, his tweets are just hilarious. At Brian M. Floyd, he's a Washington State Cougars guy, so he's suffered for a really long time. Wazoo, the Cougs. Give him a follow at Brian M. Floyd. He's probably my favorite sports Twitter follow.
And where could they follow you? They can follow you at
Carlos77 Verde. So I think you can see it up there.
Beautiful. And I think one of the coolest. Steve, I love your Twitter handle. Like every time I'm mentioning you or talking to you or direct messaging, Yahoo Mac. That's a great Twitter handle. It's fantastic.
Yeah, I think I can't give myself any credit for being ingenious about that one. I think my handle when I was at the Globe Mail was just Globe Mac, and I think I just changed it to Yahoo Mac when I started 6 years ago. So it was just pure laziness on my part, Pete.
Any accounts that are worth following?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to shamelessly plug because we actually just changed the name this week. We changed our A-Game account to Yahoo Canada Sports only because we wanted to make the account more of a destination for Canadian sports fans to come there and we're using it now to put out all the original content that we do on Yahoo Canada and any breaking news stories. So again, the great work that Nate does on 55-yard line and A-Game and buzzing the net and what Andrew Buckholz is doing on 55-yard line. I mean, we're using that Yahoo Canada Sports account to get all that content out to sports fans across the country.
Great, yeah, and it's absolutely endorsed by myself and the show. It's really good stuff, and I was really happy to have you on. So thank you all for tuning in for this episode of Popternative. It's a special week. We'll be back tomorrow with a special episode on American Thanksgiving. We actually have, Director of Scouting and Analyst from TSN, Craig Button, on the show, as well as Chris Lund, who's Community Manager at Toronto Maple Leafs, and Michael Blinn from Sports Illustrated. So it's going to be a great show tomorrow. You can follow us at Popternative on Twitter. You can like us on Facebook, Popternative. You can even join we created a LinkedIn page today, so you can join the LinkedIn group as well. You can catch episodes you missed on our YouTube page and our SoundCloud page. So thank you all for coming. And until next time.
Thank you for tuning in to Popternative. Make sure to check out our past episodes of Popternative on YouTube. Be sure to like Popternative on Facebook and follow us on Twitter.